what the bill actually says is that the government has the right to govern and Parliament has the right to make laws in New Zealand. Now, if people want to debate that, I'm really happy to. I did a debate that was largely about this a few weeks ago, and we tried to work out together what it would look like if you had sort of two sovereign states in the same land. That's an interesting discussion. I'm happy to have. It says the rights of Hapu and Iwi Māori will be protected, but also that everyone will have the same set of rights to own property and to self-determine and so on. I think that's important, with the exception of treaty settlements, which we're totally protecting. And it also says that everyone will have the same rights and duties, or ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi, just as the treaty or Te Tiriti says. Now, I think once people look at it, they say, okay, is this a threat to my language? No, not at all. Is it a threat to my culture? Not at all. Does it reduce in any way my rights to live in this country and live in my life in a way that I choose to overcome the challenges I face and make life better for me and the people I care about? Not at all. It doesn't do anything like that. What it does do is it sets a foundation that every New Zealander has equal rights.
You've raised a couple of things, and I do want to pick up on those. But at the basis of this, as you have constantly said, is about the conversation. And I think Māori are keen to have that conversation. They have been for 184 years. Why not go through the process of the conversation first with Māori, then propose the legislation based upon that conversation?
Well, here's the question. You want to have a conversation with Māori, so there's about 1 million people who have a wide range of views. You're going to need to have some sort of process that allows each person to decide for themselves what they think and what they make of something. Bear in mind, there's another 4 million people who are not Māori, but also live in this country, are mostly citizens of this country, and have every right to have a say about how the future of the constitutional arrangements they have to live under evolve. So why not include those too? And where you get to, is we put up a bill and say, here's a basic interpretation of what the Māori version meant based on Professor Kawharu's translation. Let's put up a bill, let's invite submissions to the Select Committee, and let's get a report back from that Select Committee, see what we're up to.
Okay, so you mentioned Professor Kawharu, and I guess the thing that Māori would say is that's fine. You don't have to speak to every Māori, but there have been a number of constitutional arrangements and discussions that have been had. Matike Mai, led by the late and great Moana Jackson. In fact, we'll probably encourage the fact that when you have those conversations first, then propose the legislation, you get a much better outcome. There are ways and means of doing it rather than proposing the legislation first, which is what has happened here. Many Māori would say not based on what Māori currently think and feel about it.
Yeah, many would, but equally, what's wrong with doing it this way? I mean, this is how most legislation comes to Parliament. A government gets elected, it drafts a bill, it proposes it, it gets debated, and it passes or fails based on what people think of it. So, you know, this is not a bad process either. So I guess we could both spend the rest of the interview saying, oh, why don't you do it my way, or why don't you do it my way? But I don't think that this is a bad way, because I think the critical test is, will people get to express their view? Well, there's going to be a 6-month process where anybody who's a New Zealander can make a submission.
So then let's come to the legislation itself, and in particular the 3 principles, I guess, along with the 3 articles that are outlined in the proposed legislation itself. Do you think the principles that you have developed relating to Article 1, 2 and 3 are reflective and aligned with what the chiefs signed in 1840?
Yes, I do, and critically reflective of Te Tiriti, of the Māori version. Lots of people want to have arguments about. I mean, the fact is, they signed the Māori text.
Yes,
that's the one that counts.
Yep. So, let's break it down if you don't mind. So, Article 1 or Principle 1, sorry, the Executive Government of New Zealand has full power to govern in the best interests of everyone, and be in accordance with the rule of law and maintenance of a free and democratic society. That is an understanding of kawanatanga in the 2024 context. The kawanatanga that was signed in 1840 is fundamentally different, isn't it?
Well,
as the chiefs signed it and understood it at that time.
There are certainly those who say that the chiefs didn't really take the British seriously, they didn't think much would change. I think the flip side is many of these chiefs had travelled to Sydney, some had travelled to London. They understood that the British empire, as it was then, was the superpower of the day, with technologies that they were very eager to get their hands on, with powers across the whole globe that nobody else could compete with. So I think sometimes when people say, oh, it's not plausible that they signed up for this power to actually establish a government in New Zealand, I actually think it is.
So, but the phrase they used, kawanatanga, was based upon what they understood the kawana to be at the time, which was Governor Hobson, a man who was subservient to the royal family, a man who at the time was known to be not well, a man who was a representative, not a chief itself. So the kawanatanga they understood at the time is fundamentally different. You understand that, do you?
Well, that's one interpretation, that they thought that because Hobson was ill, they didn't have to take the British that seriously. Most people that I hear actually talk about a relationship with Queen Victoria, and she at that time, of course, was the most powerful woman on earth, who some chiefs had actually gone and met.
Okay, so I think we get a difference of opinion on the kawanatanga, but let's carry on, because principle two is...
Well, can I just... I know you want to carry on with limited time, but there's another view to this, which is we can have that argument all day about what kawanatanga really meant.
Yeah.
But my issue is this. People who criticise this bill need to explain how the world they want is supposed to work. I had a really extensive debate recently about the idea that there are actually two states, and that somehow it works because it works for Indian reservations in the United States. That's a really interesting discussion, but I think where we come back to is you do actually need one parliament making one set of laws. Now, that takes you to Article 2.
Yeah, and so Principle 2, which you talk about in the legislation, the Crown recognises and will respect and protect the rights that hapu and iwi Māori had under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. However, if those rights differ from the rights of everyone, then subclause 1 only applies if those rights are agreed in this treaty settlement process. So what that ignores is the ability to have jurisdictional authority, say for hapu, or indeed a sovereign with a sovereign power relationship. So if it can exist in other places, why could that not exist here? And if that was envisaged in 1840, this is a fundamental redefinition of what was signed by the chiefs in 1840.
I think the way that you get to tino rangatiratanga in the modern age is something like charter schools or kura horua, where you say actually each community should have the right to set up its school, and so long as the children show up and can be proven to be learning at a decent pace, equivalent to any other state school, then you should be able to do that. So I look at my own hapu, when they want to do their own housing, I support that. They want a charter school, I support that, although ironically, because I'm responsible for charter schools, I can't advocate for them to get one because that would be a conflict of interest. Nonetheless, I hope that Ngāti Rehia does end up operating a charter school one day. So there are ways and means of doing this. But the thing about those policies is that it's not only Māori who want tino rangatiratanga. There are many communities in our society who would like to do things differently. For example, there are people with neurodiverse kids who say we would like education to be done differently for us. So I'm all for self-governance, I'm all for self-determination, I'm all for the government devolving power, but what Article 2 really says is actually we think those rights should be for everybody.
But that is a fundamental redefinition of what Article 2 actually says and was agreed to when signed by the chiefs in 1840. What they're talking about in Article 2 with tino rangatiratanga is Māori. Tino rangatiratanga ki ngā rangatira o ngā hapu. O rātou whenua kāinga taonga katoa. That is a fundamental redefinition. That is what you've done. Do you understand that?
I think possibly it depends how you use the word fundamental. You're saying it's a fundamental redefinition. Actually, what Article 2 says, and you just recited, is that you should be able to self-determine and live your way. I agree with that.
That's Māori Minister. That's what it says in Te Tiriti. Very clearly
but
we're talking about.
The fundamental concepts is about human beings being able to self-determine. I support that for Māori. The only change is actually I think that should be a right for everybody in New Zealand. So it's not fundamental, it takes the fundamental right and it extends it. But this is what I say to people who are opposed to this bill. We're not taking away anything from anyone. If anything, we're expanding and strengthening the concept of tino rangatiratanga, and I'm the first person to stand up and say that in new models of doing healthcare, I look at what NIB and Ngāti Whātua or Orake have done with healthcare. I'm all for that. So if you want self-determination, if you want to cherish the Māori language and culture, I'm your best friend, I'm in favour of self-determination. Now the only deal is, I think that actually it's not only Māori who want it, and I think there's a lot of other folks who should be able to have it too.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is there are many ways in which tino rangatiratanga for Māori can be expressed. You're saying tino rangatiratanga for all. That is not what Article 2 says, right?
Well, it depends. It says for all the citizens. It says for all the people.
How does it depend?
It says for all the people of New Te Rani. Now, does that mean at that time, or does it mean forever? If it means forever, then it means all the people who may come later.
Yeah, but this is the conversation bit, right? Now, that's why I say you propose something that is completely different to the interpretation.
No, it's not completely different.
No, it is. Well, that's what the scholars say.
It's exactly
that's what the historians say. That's what the scholars say.
Yeah, and they're wrong. I'm sorry, but they're wrong. Actually, universal rights, equal rights for all people, are the only way that any country has ever succeeded. So these people can go on forever and a day and say it's a fundamental change to say everybody should be able to have equal rights and self-determination. I say we're preserving tiro rangatiratanga, we're preserving self-determination for Māori, but we're also recognising that's a universal human aspiration.
But if it does work in other nations, now you mentioned one in America, and I know others that aren't in America where it does work.
Sure, give me an example.
Well, Kamloops.
Okay, in Canada.
So if it can work there, why can't it work here?
So which aspects do you think are important?
You tell me if you know the example. What doesn't work when I know it does work?
Well, you keep saying it works. What works?
Well, the ability for sovereigns to operate with sovereigns in one nation. Right? So you have sovereign power, right, with another sovereign power that work together in a nation.
Yep.
That works.
So you have a reserve. So does the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada apply to people who are First Nations who live on Kamloops?
It respects and recognises the rights guaranteed through treaties, just like it does in Article 2 of the Tiriti o Waitangi. That's what we're talking about, right?
But does the Charter of Rights and Freedoms apply?
Now you're interviewing me.
well, I mean, I tell you, it does. So the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the basic constitutional underpinning of Canada, applies to all Canadians right across the country.
I'm aware of the understanding of the constitutional arrangements. What I'm also aware of, though, is a recognition of the sovereign authority.
Okay, so we've established that basically you live under the same. Well, they do live under the same constitution. So which aspects do you think are different in Kamloops?
From what? From New Zealand or from Te Tiriti? Because what I'm saying is that this is a way in which you can evolve and action tino rangatiratanga for Māori as guaranteed in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. You're saying you told me that the experts are all wrong and you're right, right? And I'm saying you're the only one that's saying that, and instead of having a conversation with Māori about that.
You're confused about what you're saying. First of all, let's just
no. You're the one that's confused because you're completely different to what the experts.
When I said the experts are wrong, I said they're wrong when they said it is a fundamental change to say that tiro rangatiratanga should apply to all people in New Zealand, always, all people that come, not just people who were there at the time of the treaty's signing. And the reason I think they're wrong is because the world that they want can't really work. That's one issue. You've then moved on to a completely separate issue, which is it possible to have separate sovereignty as they do in Kamloops? That actually relates more to Article 1. My challenge to you is if the Charter of Rights and Freedoms applies to all Canadians, including First Nations, and if it's also the case that I'm quite open to the idea that, for example, my hapu should be able to operate a charter school and should be able to operate, then it's not actually obvious what you're objecting to, because you're not objecting to having one basic constitutional setting, as I propose in my bill, and you're not objecting to devolution of services like education. Yeah. So, when you the problem with respect is your use of pronouns. You say it works, that works. You got to actually describe what you're saying.
Like I said to you, just I think this is the problem that we're having here, right? Is that you've removed the ability. You just don't agree with the understanding of what Article 2 means to those Māori who oppose your bill. You just don't agree with it.
That's right. I think over the last 50 years, an interpretation of the treaty has grown up that says it's a partnership between races, quoting the Court of Appeal, that says that there is some people who are in partnership with the Crown and others who are not. And I just make the case that you can have diversity, you can have language, you can have culture, you can have self-actualisation and self-determination, tiro rangatiratanga, call it what you like, but that's a universal human thing that should apply to all.
And I think you've applied that as being tino rangatiratanga. It's examples of tino rangatiratanga. It is not the tino rangatiratanga as understood by Māori and as signed by the chiefs in 1840. That's the difference. right? That's the difference.
But
Let's move on.
It is the same. It's just the number of people it applies to that we're arguing about.
No, but you're saying that it can't happen, right? And Māori are saying it could happen. The problem is that's not the discussion.
And the one example you've given me is one where they have
there's two
one
examples, because
constitution.
you mentioned the American one, right? And I mentioned Kamloops, and there are others as well. But
I guess the American one, they all live under the US Constitution. So
it's clear that you don't think it can work, right? Because you haven't thought about it. And Māori are happy to have that conversation.
Actually, I think what we've shown is I have thought about it, and what I've made very clear to you is that in both cases,
so why don't you talk to Māori about it before?
Well, I do all the time.
And so they've said that they agree with this bill with you. They agree with your...
Some do, some don't. You see, here's the thing. Once upon a time, saying all Māori think the same was actually the most despicable...
But that's not what I'm saying.
Well, okay, so I have talked to lots of Māori, and many of them agree, some don't. So I don't know what are you actually trying to say in this interview?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the approach to this interview is you were the one that wanted to have the conversation. Right?
Yeah.
We're having that conversation to a certain degree now. Yeah. You're the one that said to me that you completely disagree with the scholars and the experts. You're the one that has said to me that you've talked to Māori, and yet thousands and tens of thousands of Māori go to make a hikoi based on the fact that they just don't agree with you. And they say that you're wrong. And they say that you are redefining Te Tiriti through these principles, and you are.
I don't deny that some Māori disagree with me. That's true.
But
and I've got every right to
the
disagree.
points that I've made with you, though. Because surely from what I've just said and from what you've said, you are redefining what Te Tiriti means, particularly to Māori.
I'm redefining the principles, and the principles say that the government is sovereign and Parliament has the right to make laws, that we respect the rights of iwi and hapu Māori, but actually we extend that self-determination to all people who live in this land, and that we all have equal rights before the law.
The Waitangi Tribunal has said that this bill changes the nature of the treaty, Te Tiriti, and is, quote, not supported by either the spirit or the spirit of the treaty, or Te Tiriti, and the text, of Te Tiriti. What's your response?
Well, I'm not surprised that the Waitangi Tribunal are opposed to this, and they think that it dishonours the spirit and the text and all the other things that they've said. Of course they're going to say that, because they've had 48 years to make sense of the Treaty of Waitangi, and they've come up with a set of principles that say that we're a partnership, that your role in New Zealand society depends on your ancestry. That's led to policies such as a separate Māori Health Authority, co-governance of 3 waters, 2 different chief executives, different rights to be consulted on resource management, separate Māori wards and councils, you name it. Their vision of New Zealand is one where primarily it's your ethnic background that decides your role in society, and there are no successful examples of that anywhere in the world. The ones that you have are ones where people live under one basic constitution or charter across the whole country, which is what I support. So their version of how the treaty should work doesn't work. My version of universal rights, ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi, of tino rangatiratanga, that is actually a universal human value that applies to all people that live in this land, that does work.
If it works, though, why is there so much inequity in terms of access to opportunity, health, education, and everything else? Because if those principles apply, surely we will get equitable outcomes, but we don't.
Well, first of all, for the last 50 years, we've mostly been trying the Waitangi Tribunal's version, and we've made progress. We've made some progress, but I don't think we've made progress nearly enough. I would argue that what we need, first of all, is to make it easier to build a house. If you can't build a whare on your whenua, then you don't really have tino rangatiratanga, is what I would say. And most of the problems that we have, kids going to a different school each term, kids that don't have dry, healthy homes that get respiratory diseases. I mean, fundamentally, you've got to make it easier to build a home. You've got to make education engaging. So I'm proud that the creators of ACTS were also the creators, or the parents in a way, of kohanga reo. I'm proud of what I've done with kura horua or charter schools. So actually the ACT Party can point to a pretty good heritage of trying to deregulate housing, make education better. I mean, you look at what Richard Prebble, one of our earlier leaders, did to deregulate radio, to make the iwi radio network possible. So we got a long history of promoting tiro rangatiratanga, but the central argument here is that the ACT Party and its founders and its believers believe that universal human rights are actually for everyone, not just for some.
I think what you mean is that the ACT Party support the Māori initiative that occurred with kohanga reo. Kura kaupapa. I mean, kura kaupapa, the original wakahu.
Well, we support kura kaupapa too, but I make the point.
I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying that you support those Māori initiatives developed by Māori, right? which then led to solutions and outcomes that we start to see the fruits of that labour today. But that was Māori initiative, which again follows on from, if you trace it back, the ability of Māori.
This is why we disagree, because I accept that in a specific case they were initiatives developed by Māori, but the concept that people should be free to self-determine and flourish in their own way, that is a universal concept that should be available to all.
Yeah, you're right, that is why we disagree. But Māori would say the reason why that was able to happen was because of their belief in what was signed in 1840 under Article 2. I know we're going back, but that's why we have the difference.
No, it was because in the case of radio deregulation, it was because we got rid of the closed shop where only the government could give you a radio licence and said anyone can bid for one. That was free market deregulation.
Well, that's not what happened with the evolution of First Māori Radio Station in Tupoko Tika in Wellington, though. That's not what led to the evolution of that Māori radio station, right? You know that.
Well, what led to there being a network of iwi radio stations was deregulation of radio. It wouldn't have been possible without that policy. So I just make the point that you make everything about Māori. I make everything about policy for human, and funnily enough, good policy for human is good for Māori and good for Pacific, and it's good for people who aren't actually focused on ethnicity. It's just good for people.
I think what Māori would say is what's good for Māori is good for everyone.
No, I would say what's good for everyone is good for Māori, and this is the difference, right?
True.
Always you put race first. I put humanity first.
No,
you just did it.
No, I'm just reflecting what Māori have said, right? And this is the thing. I think when you hear Māori say what's good for Māori is good for everyone else, you're saying, well, that removes or that delegitimises or that alienates everyone else in the process. No, it doesn't. What it does do is try to provide solutions for an equitable access to outcomes that we want today. If you address that issue, that works for everyone. And you're saying no.
Well, it actually doesn't, because you can have.
Well, hang on, it does. I just showed you it does. Could I come up with Māori radio? They were all started by Māori.
If I give you a world where there is a separate legal status for Māoris, different right to be consulted on resource management, seats at the table on the co-governance of resource
which is work.
3 waters.
I mean, Waikato River Authority works, right?
I beg your pardon?
Waikato River Authority, co-management, Te Wera, all those examples of co-management work.
I actually think that the Waikato River Authority is a pretty good treaty settlement, but that's the difference, right? I support treaty settlements, I support property rights, I don't support a separate Māori Health Authority, don't support co-governance of 3 waters, don't support having 2 different chief executives, because you said if it works for Māori, it works for everyone. Actually, if you have a policy that says there is a place for Māori specially reserved based on who your ancestors were, and everyone else, well, that doesn't actually work for everybody. What works for everybody is a world where all of us, by dint of being human, have the same basic respect and dignity due to us so that we can choose how to flourish in our own way. That is good for every human, including Māori. That's very different from starting with your Māoriness and then extending out to everyone else.
If, as everyone says it will happen, at the second reading of the Treaty Principles Bill, that they will vote against it, and this is gone, will you give this up? Is it over?
No, it won't be gone, because the funny thing is the people who are the most certain that this bill won't go anywhere are the people most determined to stop it from going anywhere.
We're just basing that on what the political parties have said, though. Right. We're not making it up. I mean, the political parties have said they're not going to vote.
I understand that, but I've already started answering your question. You're just catching up.
Okay, no, I'm just trying to be really clear about what I'm asking.
Yeah, no. So it won't be gone for the simple reason that as soon as you start the idea that we're not going to just talk to Māori, by which you mean a specific group of Māori. We're going to talk to all Māori and everyone else. This is going to be a democratic process where everybody who is born or legally immigrates to this country, who is a citizen, who has to live under the constitutional laws, gets to have a say. Once we've done that, that is a totally different chapter in the history and evolution of the treaty, and that's why some people who at the moment expect only them to be consulted are so upset.
I'm not. I mean, I don't know what you mean when you say people only want them to be consulted. I think everyone wants to talk about this, but be that as it may, just so I'm clear, are you saying that then the conversation continues about the treaty, that you want to lead, even though your bill, as has been mentioned by the political parties now, who won't support it to the second reading? So I just want to get to the point. So you're saying you will continue that conversation?
I already know what your question. Yes. So I'll give you an example. In 1995, Michael Laws put up his Death with Dignity bill. That was to legalise euthanasia. Went down in flames, more than 2 votes to 1. People, he's written about it in his book, people were verbally abusing him as they voted it down in the chamber. And you know what? 24 years later, ironically it was me, who ended up passing a euthanasia bill and giving that freedom to all people through that legislation. Now, sometimes these things take time, and there's lots of examples. Homosexual law reform, I think the first bill went up in about 1972, wasn't legalised till 1986. So most worthwhile things, the first bill fails. This one might or it might not. Doesn't really matter. The reason people are so opposed to even talking about it is we're going to let everyone talk about it. That's the real change here.
I think, like I said to you, just in summary, Māori have been talking about this for 184 years, right? So when you say that this may take a long time, what you're really talking about is your pursuit of what you want the treaty to mean in the modern context. Is that what's happening here? Because what I think Māori don't understand is this is about, I thought, the conversation. What you're saying is, no, it's about these things that I believe.
No, it's about a set of values that are the only ones that work around the world. You go around the world, the places where everyone has universal rights, universal respect and dignity for being human, those places are a huge success. The places where your identity matters more than your humanity or your membership of a nation state, that's where you get trouble and you don't get much progress. So you can make it about me if you like, but actually, if you want to talk about,
it is what you believe to be the Te Tiriti, what it means today. As I said, Māori have been talking about this for 184 years, about what they think it means, right? So the thing is
and it's
that
time to bring everyone into this conversation. And I think what you'll find,
I don't think Māori are opposed to that. They're opposed to the principles that you have defined them to be.
Well,
not the wider conversation.
This is you speaking for Māori again. Actually, there's a range of views. You are trying to. You should say some people, and bear in mind, there are some European who oppose my bill too. There's some who are for.
Yeah,
some
they'll
who are
be
against.
marching too. Yeah.
Well, who knows? I mean, the fact is that we've got to stop grouping each other by race. That used to be despicable. It used to be stereotyping. It used to be called racism. Now it's just so casual, isn't it? This is what Māori think. No, actually,
that's
we all
what
think
you're
differently.
accusing me of doing now.
That's what you've done several times in this interview.
No, that's not what's happening, and I think it's really unfair for you to say that, actually. All I'm saying is that the perspective is this, right, that people have been talking about this, and in particular Māori have been talking about what they say their rights and interests are.
You specifically said
Waitangi.
Māori disagree with this bill, and that's not true. Some do, some don't.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Māori disagree with this bill.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay, so you're close to the point. And I think you said the same thing a number of times too. Okay, so just one final thing that I wanted to ask you. You are committed to having the ongoing conversation with everyone, right? Just so I'm clear, with everyone. If this bill doesn't get past second reading, how will that happen? Is it based on these principles that you will continue to push, or does the conversation change to something else?
Because
or are you just going to push for referendum?
No, because I'm a listener. So, I've said no one should make up their mind before they've seen the text. Too many people, I believe, have. Now it's time for people to actually look at what's proposed, decide what they like or don't like about it. If they want to come up with some version of Kamloops, then they should research it first and see where we get to. But ultimately, I think what's really important is that we're all open-minded about this bill, including me, and what happens afterwards, we'll see where it gets to, how far it gets and what the result is. What I do know is the simple idea of universal humanity. That is a timeless idea that transcends any particular point in history or ethnic background or ancestry or events in the world. That is an idea we should all be signing up to promote, rather than dividing ourselves or seeing us primarily as an ethnic group.
Minister, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to sit down with you.
Pleasure.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.